I'd like to open up for questions in a moment from the floor, so I don't know if we have a roving microphone to do that. Just to give you a second to think of a question, I want to pick up on Anu's last point, because I think it's extremely helpful, and talk about the diversity of India. And I'd like, if anyone else wants to jump in, I think, Kristen, you mentioned China. You made the reference to China, and there's a sort of temptation always to say, oh, is India the next China? Is it going to grow like China? But as an outsider coming to a country like India, with all the diversity, all the jugaad, the bottom-up, the mess in some ways, the difficulty of understanding it because nothing's quite predictable, isn't that a lot harder than going to a China? Because China might be authoritarian and top-down and rigid and so on, but at least you kind of know what you're getting with China. You know, if you talk to the government and the government says A is A, then A will be A. You get to India and things can sort of turn to dust in your hands. So is there a disadvantage to being diverse and democratic and have things from the ground up that we tend to talk about as a great advantage? Is it actually hard?
That's a good question. No, I mean, do we prefer a planned economy to democracy? No way. Of course not. No, we believe in diversity. We believe that, I mean, of course you have to handle it. Yes, it is more. I mean, I myself had an experience moving from Switzerland to Italy.
Right.
I think that would be very much like coming from everything organized into everything quite chaotic.
Yeah.
So you have to be flexible, and I think the one who, on the industrial side, who will win in India will be the one who is flexible. I mean, you have to be able to adapt to basically everything. And of course, that's a hard journey to embark on. And I think the way we approach it is that we just have to start. I mean, we were late coming in. Volvo was already there. Yeah. We had to do something. And then, of course, you take certain risks, and that costs you some money down the line. Yeah. But you adapt, and if you are flexible, you will come to terms with it. And, of course, the reason why we're not in China is the regulatory framework in the automotive sector. That's overplanned.
Yeah.
And there is not free trade and so on, where India is far ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you like to pick up on it? I mean, you described jugaad as 100% a positive force. I mean, you see it as something that's really wonderful because it can inspire ideas, it can lead to innovation. But isn't there a downside to jugaad as well, that sometimes it ends up being sort of chaotic, or the sort of thing we've just talked about there, that maybe there's less predictability? And does that make it even harder for those who are, for example, the example of the Tata Nano? Yes, it was a wonderful concept, but actually as a product, it hasn't worked.
I think there are a couple of things. So there's the traditional jugaad, right? So jugaad can mean a little bit, maybe bypassing the law. Jugaad can mean many things that we don't see as beneficial, but I would use the old analogy of, a knife in the hand of a thief is frightening, and in the hands of a surgeon might be more reassuring, right? Yeah. So it's kind of that mindset and how you use it. I would say that Tata Nano was a success in some ways. Okay. I agree they had their issues that came up, but they continued to manage them and think about how do we market better? How do we make sure that we have even better safety? So, and I would think in terms of creating a landmark in the industry, it was a tremendous success.
Right.
In terms of coming into India and understanding how the jugaad mindset works, or how the Indian innovation mindset works, it's always going to be a challenge. I would say, and certainly to have this attitude of flexibility is extremely powerful. These are the companies who will win in India. You have to be able to go with that flow. At the same time, I think that if I can just speak from my own personal experience with my own company, what I did is I brought that mindset back with me. And that's what I learned from Carlos Ghosn and many others. If you can, so it's not only what's happening there, but couple it with the processes and the more linear approach of, let's say, a Swedish company, and you have some pretty good magic. And I'll say that not from what I read, but what I experienced in my own work. So right. when we put different companies together, or frankly, even within one company, we typically sometimes we have dividing lines between, let's say, a US-based group and an India-based group.
Right.
When you put them together, that's, I think, where the magic happens. So it's not a substitute, it's kind of you augment.
Right. Yeah. So it's the mixing together produces something wonderful. Yeah. I heard a little noise of skepticism when I said the Nano was a failure. Do you want to pick up on that and correct me?
No, I think Nano did start off I think it was more skeptics who thought it couldn't be done. There were multiple hurdles that were posed, but I think today, Nano has it sort of exemplifies that you could produce a wonderful car. I have ridden in one. It looks deceptively small, but when you're actually inside the car, it's quite roomy. So I think it is an engineering marvel because, of course, and I agree with Sumon that you've got to give credit for somebody who actually took the bold step. Yeah. Right? You had earlier alluded to, India has a lot of potential, but, can India ride on potential? I think in order for a country to be able to harness its potential, I think risk-taking, lauding these kind of initiatives, and then, I alluded to it as the perfect storm, right? Things have to come together. There has to be triggers that would unlock potential, whether it is in a leader, whether it's in an individual, or whether it's in a nation. So I certainly think that Nano is as the first step towards unlocking many more such daring sort of potential that lies in India.
I know you've already talked us through the diversity of India, and I was really struck by your map with your the 60-odd cities, 70-odd cities that were going to be where all the growth is really going to come in the next 10 or 15 years. The other detail that struck me about that is a lot of those cities were coastal, and if you look at where the roads are being built and where the growth is coming, it's often in those states that are on the coast. Do you think there's a risk within India that you have almost a two-tier India in the way we sometimes talk about a two-tier Europe, that you'll have the coastal states, often with slightly better run governments, pushing ahead, and some of the inland, northern, landlocked states falling behind?
I think you already have that situation. It's not something that's part of the future. One of the most fascinating parts about India and the US from an economic researcher's perspective is because you can really double-click and understand the range. And when you do that, by the way, this is also true of the US, so it's not just true of India, but certainly when you do that in India, what you do find is that you have tiers of states, and you do find that the top end is 2 to 3 times as rich. The cities and the districts that I had highlighted on the map actually have about 80% of a lot of the transportation infrastructure, so they are much better positioned than the interiors to capitalize on industrial investment and job creation and all of that. But I think that's good. That's actually good, because that actually creates momentum and creates that demand for labor that comes in at different skill levels. And hopefully, I think that should promote more internal migration. So unlike China, India's story has not actually been one of massive internal, inside country, rural to urban migration. Some of the challenges around, the cost of living in cities, the fact that cultures are so diverse, the fact that labor markets don't match based on formal employment exchanges, but a lot on informal word-of-mouth networks. All of these have meant that labor is not actually so mobile, which is not a good thing for any country. Yeah. So if the coastal parts of India, supported by infrastructure, connected to the rest of the world, are creating economic opportunities for the rest, that's actually a good thing, we think.
Fantastic. Questions from the floor. We have a microphone here, we have a hand there. Maybe we'll take a couple. If you could identify yourself and keep the question short, if possible.
Yeah. My name is Sridhar, I work with Volvo Buses. So far we've talked a lot about industry and technology, but here's a thought. The initial wars were fought over oil and water. The next wars will be fought over food. How important is agriculture going to be in the reimagining of India in 2030?
Okay, great question. Who would like to tackle agriculture? We're in the middle of a drought. We have enormous pressures. Anu, do you want to begin, and anyone else who follows up?
I'll offer one short perspective. I think agriculture as a sector is extraordinarily important for India. Not from a GDP growth perspective, and I don't believe from a food security perspective, because we are in a global economy where trade can solve a lot of other problems on food security. But from the perspective of the 680 million who are vulnerable, who might have come out of poverty but just not making it into the middle class, in terms of boosting income growth for those people, we think there is a roadmap in which many things can deliver against that, but raising agricultural productivity through real investment, whether it's in irrigation or know-how or seeds or what have you. But that piece is needed to deliver at least 20% of the overall uplift of India from where we are to getting everyone to a minimum acceptable standard of living. So extraordinary importance to that particular sector.
So all I would say is agronomy is very important, as Anu said, but more importantly, driving down affordability. Food has to become staple and available, not just food, but nourishing food, so that the children of India. So I think there are many companies who are actually devoting themselves to it, and there's actually a lot of international companies who are coming into India with a view to driving affordability of food.
Okay, thank you. I see a question on the front row from a good friend of ours, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I'd actually like to begin with a comment and a reaction to what you said about China. I was based in United States, and the common view there amongst many of the companies was China is, yes, indeed, it's much easier to go in, but once you have fought the battle to establish yourself in India, then you didn't have the same risks as you have in China of something that you see on the website just being completely removed as if it was never there. There is a degree of openness and transparency and rule of law which you can trust in India, even if the going is slow. And I think that's something that companies which have taken the trouble to go into India do realize, and they stay there. My question, comment, or whatever I haven't yet quite figured it out, is when Simone and I were talking over the phone, I was trying to persuade her to come all the way for this conference. Innovation in Western world is very often, not only is it quite expensive, but it tends to focus on issues which are important to them, which is quite natural. So you would have a lot of money spent on developing electric connection, which goes off or comes on when you go into the bathroom, rather than somebody just taking the trouble to switch it on. Now, there is, innovation which is much more connected to what we in India feel as the quality of life, which is not getting looked at. So we came up with this word innovation divide. That innovation is getting perhaps focused into areas which don't matter to many. As you said, it's not just value for money, it's value for many. So is there something that any of you or anybody in the room can also suggest that would make Indian and Swedish companies or innovators work together to get both value for money and value for many? That is, focus on problems that are relevant for India.
Would you like to take it, Simone?
Sure, I'll start. I'm sure there are lots of comments on this panel and probably in the room as well. So I think, Mrs. Ambassador Bose-Harrison, when I think about that conversation, and I love that word that you used of innovation divide, because I agree that very often maybe we don't look at some of the fundamental needs in India that inherently, when you're in a resource-rich country, you might find them something that isn't relevant. I think my biggest message for this room would be, and Anu, you were sharing that at the end of your slide there, and you didn't probably go through it completely because of what I was talking about, but she gave a couple of examples of Western companies that were innovating for India. Okay, so creating these high-value, low-cost products, whether it's an ECG unit or whether it's a tractor. And what they found is that those have tremendous relevance and big markets and are big drivers of revenue in the US, where those companies are based. So I think that when we think about these fundamental needs, so I need to measure heart rhythms, but I need to do it at a much lower cost. I need to do it with considerations of very simple focused design. I need to think about things like mobility. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want complexity reduction? Who doesn't want ease of use, ease of repairability, right? Who doesn't want lower cost if you get, now remember, this isn't decreased quality. This is thinking about what is a focused need. And I think fundamentally the Indian market asks us and forces us to look at fundamental needs. And to me, if I think of the mega trend that's emerging, it's those same needs are becoming similar in developed economies too.
Kristen, do you see it in your sector? Are there opportunities for trucks to come back? Clearly, I wouldn't say, but we have started a research and development center in India, and just to serve our Indian products to start with. But I'm sure we will see the same kind of pattern, that innovation coming out of there as solutions to the problems in India, with a lot of people, with demands for lower price points, will help in other markets. I don't know where, I don't know when, but I'm sure that it's going to come. Yeah. So I agree. Yeah. There's a hand here.
Thank you. My name is Stefan Mehr. I work for the biggest media group in Scandinavia. I'm a journalist, but I have also been traveling to India for over 30 years, and what attracted me always were your great traditions and culture. So if you are reimagining India in 2030, what about your traditions and your culture? What role does it play then?
Brilliant question.
Go on, Sisha.
It's a brilliant question, and it is in a way sad that the people today who actually enjoy and appreciate Indian tradition and culture are actually people outside India. Right? Seriously, I mean, I've lived the last 25 years of my life in the United States. Every Indian who lives in the United States makes sure that their children understand the dance forms of Kuchipudi or Bharatanatyam, whereas the life in India has become so competitive that people are actually imbibing the Western world. So I think there's a dynamite opportunity here to actually foster that. There could be business ideas to do that. But my own thinking is that, along with progress, along with spending power, sooner or later these things would come back, and there is enough of the old guard still left around to make sure. So India is not that young yet. So I think, but that's a very conscious thing that at a societal level we may have to inculcate.
I think we have time for another question, so one at the front.
Yes, this is about China-India comparison, because I stayed for many years in China and study China like deep research. I mean, I can tell, traveled through most of China and East Asia, and I observed three things that I really, liked in China, the way they developed is, one is decentralized development, in which they developed many cities in a state particularly, because in India you'll find that there will be one main city or the second main city, and the rest is the 20, 30, 40, 50 districts are depending on that city, huge. That's one thing. And then the second thing is the government spends a huge amount of money abroad, buying up ports, setting up infrastructure. They do this, they did the Africa conference, which was done during Modi's time. That's one thing. And third thing is indigenization of technology. For example, trains are running at 380 kilometers per hour between, Beijing and Shanghai, and, there is a maglev 431 kilometers. Every technology that goes into China, a few years down the line, it's Chinese technology that comes in. There is a joke in China which says copyright means the right to copy. Okay, so these three things that, I just wanted to, give it from my knowledge, because at McKinsey you would be consulting with governments and all the stuff. But actually, I'm really happy that, for the past 2-3 years, things are happening at China's speed in some cases. For example...
Okay. So I think we'll just quickly wrap it up. So anyone, any lesson from China that India should take as a priority from China? Is it stealing technology from Western companies, or is it being quick enough to sort of use the lessons from other countries fast?
I would just say it is very much the spirit of this Prime Minister to say that, economic growth and productivity is crucial to solve India's problems, and a strategy that's focused around investments, productivity, growth, and perhaps job creation is actually more important than a strategy that actually looks inward and doesn't focus on those things.
Great. Well, thank you very much. If you could join me thanking the panel, and I think it's time for a tea break.
Thank you.
Thank you.